The pale golden light of late afternoon filtered through the delicate lace curtains of a modest home tucked in the heart of Savannah, Georgia. Eleanor Harris, 78 years old, sat in stillness at her kitchen table. That table had once echoed with laughter, Sunday dinners, and the clinking of cutlery. Now, silence settled in like a heavy fog. In her hands, she held a worn photograph. Her late husband, Walter, standing tall and proud in his military uniform, smiling at her from a time that felt impossibly distant. Across the room, her daughter, Camille Harris, paced in a sleek navy pantsuit. Her handbag strap was gripped tightly in one hand, and her polished shoes tapped lightly against the tiled floor. Her braided hair was gathered into a neat bun. Camille's energy was tense, her mind clearly elsewhere. Eleanor glanced up, her voice as soft as the breeze whispering through the trees outside. "You're quiet today." Camille hesitated. "Mom, I need you to start packing. We're leaving tomorrow morning." Eleanor blinked, confused. "Packing? Where are we going?" There was a pause. Camille didn't meet her mother's gaze. "Somewhere where you'll be more comfortable. A place with more support. More people around. It's time." The words dropped into the room like heavy stones. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. They were still sharp, even with the years. "You're putting me in a home." "No," Camille said too quickly. "It's not like that. She sighed and dropped the pretense. "I think it's what's best, Mom. You've been alone too much. It's not safe. And I can't always be here." Eleanor rose slowly from her chair, her hands trembling as they grasped the edge of the table for balance. "So I'm a burden now." Her voice was brittle. "You're not a burden," Camille said, her voice cracking. "I'm doing this because I care. I want you to be okay." Eleanor shook her head, heart heavy. "I raised you. I gave up everything so you could have a future. And now you repay me by taking me away from the only home I've ever known." There was no shouting, only silence. Eleanor turned and left the kitchen, her heart splintered. In her bedroom, she opened her old suitcase and began packing. Slowly, methodically, as if preparing for the end. What Camille didn't know, what Eleanor would never say aloud, was how deep her loneliness had grown, how her knees throbbed each night, how she sometimes whispered Walter's name and wished he'd come take her with him. She had always been strong, proud, independent. She wouldn't cry, but as she folded her favorite shawl, her old Bible, and a small ceramic bird Camille had made her at age 7, the tears came anyway. That night, sleep came in fragments. She drifted in and out of dreams, haunted by memories, regrets, and the echo of the word burden. The morning was gray and cool. Camille helped her mother into the car, her movements gentle. Eleanor said nothing. Her suitcase lay in the trunk, stuffed with the remnants of a life she didn't want to leave behind. They drove for hours, the highway stretching endlessly. Camille tried to make conversation, but Eleanor responded with one-word answers, her eyes on the passing scenery. Then, they veered off the main road onto a quiet gravel path lined with trees and wildflowers. Eleanor's shoulders stiffened. "Where are we?" she asked. Camille forced a smile. "You'll see." Eleanor looked around. No large building. No sign of a care facility. Just woods. Rolling hills in the distance. As the car slowed, Eleanor braced herself. Then she saw it. At the end of the driveway, nestled beside a serene, shimmering lake, stood a house. Her breath caught. Soft blue shutters. A wide front porch with rocking chairs. Flower beds blooming with marigolds. Every detail. It was the house. She had drawn it in a notebook almost 40 years ago, back when Walter was alive. They had dreamed of retiring by a lake, but they'd sold the land to pay for Camille's college tuition. That dream had died, or so she thought. Eleanor stepped out of the car, gripping the doorframe for balance. Her voice trembled. This can't be." Camille came around the car, eyes already glistening. "It's real, Mom. I found the original listing. Bought it back. Used your old sketches to restore it." Eleanor turned to her daughter. "But why?" Camille stepped forward and placed her hands over Eleanor's. "Because you gave up everything for me. You sold your dream so I could chase mine. I wanted to give it back to you." Emotion swelled in Eleanor's chest. She looked at the house again, the dancing wind chimes, the open windows bathing the rooms in light. Years of grief and silence seemed to lift. Inside, the air smelled of fresh wood and lilacs. A hand-woven quilt lay across the couch. On the mantel, a photo of Walter cradling baby Camille, his eyes shining with joy. Eleanor wandered from room to room, fingertips brushing familiar wood, heart full. In the back bedroom, a rocking chair sat by the window, overlooking the lake. She touched it, feeling something inside her awaken. Camille stood behind her, quietly. Eleanor turned. "I thought you didn't want me anymore." Camille's voice broke. "Mom, I've always wanted you. I just didn't know how to show it. Until now." Eleanor opened her arms. Camille stepped into them. They held each other, the years of distance melting away. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor blossomed. She planted flowers with Camille, just as she and Walter had once planned. She baked bread, played soft jazz, and sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the lake. Neighbors visited, some old, some new. One brought a scrapbook of the town's history. In it, Eleanor found photos of her and Walter at a 4th of July picnic, smiling in black and white. Camille came every weekend, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with renovation plans, always with stories and laughter. Eleanor, who once believed her story was ending, began to feel as if it were just beginning. One morning, while planting lavender by the porch, Eleanor turned to her daughter. "I used to think dreams died when you gave them up. But maybe some dreams are just waiting for the right time to bloom." Camille smiled, brushing soil from her fingers. "Or maybe they bloom when someone loves you enough to bring them back to life." They stood side by side, mother and daughter, the lake glistening behind them, the scent of lavender in the air. Eleanor looked at Camille, then out at the calm water. "I'm not going to a nursing home, am I?" Camille laughed and squeezed her hand. "You're already home, Mom." And for the first time in years, Eleanor believed it. But their peace was soon tested. 2 months later, Camille received a letter from the county. The lakefront property had been marked for acquisition. A developer was planning a luxury resort. The house Eleanor now called home was in the way. Camille was furious. She stormed into the county office. "This house has stood here for decades. It's a legacy, not a commodity." The clerk replied coolly, "You have 60 days to vacate." When Eleanor found out, she didn't cry. She sat in her rocking chair, looking out at the lake. Then she stood up, reached for her coat, and told Camille, "We're going to fight." Together, mother and daughter gathered documents, contacted historical preservationists, and rallied neighbors. Word spread. A local journalist picked up their story. Soon, Eleanor's face was on the front page of the Savannah Gazette beneath the headline, "War Widow Battles Developers for Her Home." A movement grew. On the day of the county hearing, Eleanor stood at the podium, her voice unwavering. "This house is not just wood and paint. It's my husband's memory, my daughter's dream, my fight to live with dignity. You may have blueprints, but I have 78 years of truth." The room erupted in applause. The developers withdrew. The house stayed. Eleanor celebrated on the porch with Camille and half the town. That night, as fireflies danced above the lavender, she whispered to the stars, "We did it, Walter. We came home." And this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of life, love, and the sound of dreams finally coming true.